The first time I saw the folder, my chest locked up like I'd swallowed ice. Ethan Cole said, This shouldn't be here. The files weren't named in words, just long strings of numbers, each one like a date that shouldn't exist. The motel room's air conditioner rattled in the corner, but my skin felt damp, heavy. A dark web archive is never just storage, it's a mausoleum. I clicked one at random. Rachel Porter whispered behind me, Don't. Her voice broke like it was dragging chains. I'd heard stories, urban legends about government ops, but never thought I'd see proof. The screen flickered, and for a split second, a blurred figure was strapped to a chair, a shadow looming over them. I slammed the laptop shut, the sound louder than I intended. Rachel's eyes stayed locked on the lid, as if the video could bleed through metal. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed, and both of us froze. I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, the kind that know exactly where they're going. The knock wasn't loud, but it was the kind of sound you can't pretend you didn't hear. Ethan whispered, Don't move. I felt my pulse in my teeth. Rachel stepped back toward the bathroom, eyes flicking between me and the door. I counted the seconds. Whoever it was, they didn't knock again. They waited. The old motel carpet muffled any movement outside, but I swore I could hear breathing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. No caller ID. I didn't answer. Ethan motioned toward the desk drawer, and I pulled it open to find a rusted revolver. We're not using that, I said, but my voice didn't sound like mine. The air in the room thickened, heavy with the smell of damp carpet and burnt coffee. Somewhere beyond the door, a shadow shifted under the crack, then pulled away. The silence afterward was worse than the knock. We didn't open the door that night. Instead, Ethan shoved the laptop into his backpack, grabbed the revolver, and told me to follow. Rachel didn't argue. She just threw on her coat and kept glancing at the window like it might shatter any second. Outside, the night air felt colder than it should, a sharp wind cutting through the parking lot. We kept our heads down, passing rows of empty cars under buzzing sodium lights. I looked back once, and the motel door to our room was still closed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching from inside. Ethan's car was a beat-up Ford Chevy Impala, dull blue with one headlight out. He started it without turning on the lights, letting it idle in the dark. Rachel sat in the back, knees pulled to her chest. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere they can't find us, Ethan said, but it didn't sound convincing. The laptop sat on the passenger seat like a loaded trap. I kept thinking about that blurred figure in the chair, how the shadows moved like they had weight. We drove for an hour without speaking, the road stretching ahead like it didn't end. The radio stayed off. Ethan kept checking the rearview mirror, and every time I did too. Somewhere past midnight we pulled into an abandoned gas station. We can't keep it, Rachel said, pointing at the laptop. It's evidence, Ethan replied. It's a death sentence, she shot back. Neither of them was wrong. The gas station bathroom smelled like mildew and metal. Ethan splashed water on his face, staring into a cracked mirror that made his reflection look fractured. We have to know what's on it, he said. Rachel stood in the doorway, arms folded tight. Knowing will kill us faster, she replied. The wind outside rattled the loose siding, and the Impala's headlights cut pale beams through the fog. My phone buzzed again. No caller ID. This time, a voicemail appeared instantly, without ringing. I pressed play. A man's voice, low and steady, said my name, then added, You shouldn't have looked. We sat in the car, engine idling. Ethan kept the laptop on his lap, staring at the closed lid like it might detonate. Rachel rubbed her hands together, eyes darting to the fogged-up windows. Yep. I replayed the voicemail, letting them hear it. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's not random, he said. Rachel leaned forward. Then they already know where we are. The Impala's heater hummed, but I couldn't stop shivering. Somewhere beyond the mist, a pair of headlights glowed, unmoving, too far to see the car itself. Ethan put the car in gear without a word. The road ahead disappeared into the fog, the yellow lines blurring under the tires. Rachel whispered, "What if they're following?" I checked the mirror. Those headlights were still there, faint but constant. Ethan pressed harder on the gas. "We'll lose them," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The fog swallowed the world, muting the sound of the engine. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text. "Stop driving." We veered off the main road onto a narrow gravel path lined with skeletal trees. The fog thinned here, revealing an old barn slouched under its own weight. "Nobody will find us here," Ethan muttered. We parked in the shadows, engine ticking in the cold. Rachel's hands shook as she lit a cigarette she wouldn't smoke. "You know what this means," she said. Ethan nodded. "We open it." The barn doors groaned when he pushed them, the sound far too loud in the still night. Inside the barn, dust floated in the thin beams of moonlight through the roof gaps. We set the laptop on an overturned crate. Ethan powered it on, the screen's glow carving our faces out of the darkness. The video opened instantly, no password, no menu. A concrete room. A metal chair. A man in a black hood moving into frame. The figure in the chair twitched, muffled sounds escaping. Rachel took a step back, hitting the barn wall. I couldn't breathe. The hooded man looked directly into the camera and smiled. The hooded man in the video stood unnaturally still, only his breathing giving him away. Ethan muttered, "This isn't random, he knows we're watching." Rachel pressed against the barn wall, eyes locked on the screen. The camera in the video panned slowly, revealing a corner table with tools laid out in deliberate order. The hooded man reached for one. I felt my stomach turn. Then, as if reacting to us, he paused, tilted his head toward the lens, and whispered something we couldn't hear. The sound glitched, warping into static. Ethan slammed the laptop shut, but the whisper still seemed to echo in the barn air. Rachel said, "He saw us." Ethan shook his head, but wouldn't meet her eyes. The barn felt smaller now, air heavier. I stepped outside, desperate for cold air, but the fog had returned, thicker than before. My breath clouded instantly, and from somewhere in the mist came the sound of an engine idling. I couldn't see the source. "We need to go," I said, backing toward the barn. Ethan already had the laptop in his bag, his hand gripping the revolver inside his jacket. The idling grew louder. We jumped into the Impala, gravel crunching under the tires as Ethan reversed hard. The fog made every turn a blind gamble. Rachel kept looking behind us, muttering numbers under her breath like a prayer. I realized she was repeating the file names from the archive. Ethan glanced at her in the mirror. "Why are you doing that?" She didn't answer. Her voice just got faster. Somewhere behind us, headlights burst through the mist, gaining ground. The chase stretched for miles, the fog a constant veil. The headlights behind us vanished suddenly, swallowed by darkness. "They turned off their lights," Ethan muttered. Rachel's voice was barely audible. "That's worse." My phone lit up with a text. Another date, not to Daz. Ethan glanced at it and cursed. "That's in 2 days," he said. The road narrowed, trees closing in, and the feeling in my chest was that whatever was coming was already too close. We finally stopped on a one-lane bridge, the wooden planks groaning under the car's weight. Ethan killed the engine. The silence was deafening. Rachel gripped the seat, eyes scanning the dark water below. "We can dump it," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "It's evidence," he said again, but softer this time. The laptop sat between us, closed, humming faintly as if still alive. In the distance, a single headlight appeared on the far end of the bridge, unmoving. The single headlight didn't move, and the bridge felt like a plank over an abyss. Ethan said, "Stay in the car." Rachel said, "He's waiting." I opened my door anyway, and cold river air slapped my face awake. A dark SUV eased forward until the good headlight framed us like a mugshot. A man stepped out, coat collar up, badge in a leather wallet held high. He said, "Marcus Hale, homicide, Franklin County." His voice matched the voicemail. He didn't smile. He studied our plates, then our faces, then the closed laptop on my knees. Detective Marcus Hale said, "Noah Reyes, you picked up something that was meant to stay buried." Ethan said, "How do you know our names?" Hale said, "Because you've been on a list since 10:04 p.m. Rachel flinched like a nerve had been struck. Hale lowered the badge, eyes sweeping the fog. He said, "Either you get in my car, or you get erased on this bridge." The river below answered with one slow ripple. Hale's safe house was a foreclosed ranch house off a service road, blinds crooked and mailbox missing. He killed the lights as we rolled in. Inside, a corkboard spanned a wall, layered with maps, receipts, and photos of doors with no names. Hale said, "I chased a ghost unit for 5 years. Parallax strategic, private, patriotic, profitable." Ethan said, "Government?" Hale said, "Worse. Plausible deniability with invoices." He gestured to a printout of numeric strings. He said, "You think these are dates. They are payroll lights." He tapped one string twice. He said, "This one routes to an Ethan C. Cole." Ethan's jaw locked. Then he shook his head hard. "I never worked for them," he said, but his voice thinned. Rachel watched the board like it might start speaking. I said, "Why us?" Hale said, "Because someone needed witnesses who scare easy and run fast." The heater clicked on and sounded like a distant countdown. Hale plugged the laptop into his own monitor and muted the audio. He said, "We watch the edges, not the center." The video opened to the same concrete room, but the frame drifted, catching a reflection in a steel tray. A wrist passed by, gloved, wearing a paracord bracelet with a red thread woven off pattern. Rachel inhaled like she had touched a live wire. Ethan said, "You know that bracelet?" Rachel said, "I made it in college for someone who ghosted me." Hale's eyes flicked to her. He said, "Name?" Rachel stared at the floorboards. "No name left," she whispered. The hooded figure stepped closer to the lens, as if smelling us. Hale froze the frame on the bracelet. He said, "Parallax hired from campuses. They liked people who needed to prove they weren't afraid." The frozen smile in the reflection looked too calm for a human face. Rachel said, "I interned at a cyber vendor that scrubbed metadata for defense contractors." Her voice shook, then steadied. "I signed an NDA so thick it felt like a Bible." Ethan said, "Why keep that from us?" Rachel said, "Because I needed a way in." She opened her phone and showed a thread of unsent drafts, coordinates cued like prayers. Hale said, "Who do those go to?" Rachel said, "Someone who promised me my sister's last location." The room seemed to tilt. Ethan said, "You were guiding us." Rachel said, "I was bargaining with a monster." She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her flannel. Hale said, "You delivered them the chase they wanted." Rachel flinched but didn't look away. She said, "I'll deliver them something else." The heater clicked again, and every shadow in the house lengthened. The power died like a breath held too long. Hale didn't curse. He said, "They're here." The house fell into a blue wash from a battery radio. Through the blinds, a row of low beams lined the service road, all aimed at us. Ethan said, "How many?" Hale said, "Enough to make paperwork disappear." Rachel opened the laptop without asking, fingers steady now. She said, "If they want an upload, let's give them one." Hale said, "You broadcast, you paint a target on the nation." Rachel said, "Target is already painted." The monitor flickered on backup power. A new file appeared on the archive like a gift with a bomb inside. Its name was not a date. It was 3 words. Ethan read them aloud and went silent. The next upload was our names. Engines idled outside like a pack, deciding which throat to take first. Detective Marcus Hale said, "We buy 6 minutes or we don't buy tomorrow." Ethan Cole said, "I can mirror the archive to public relays." Rachel Porter said, "Do it, and don't look back." The blinds flashed white as headlights drifted, testing angles. I felt the safe house breathing with us, wood popping like knuckles. Hale moved with calm economy, locking doors we knew were symbolic. He said, "Phone's in a metal bowl now." We obeyed. A bullhorn crackled with corporate politeness. A voice said my name, and offered amnesty for the laptop. Ethan whispered, "They want the keys, not us." Rachel said, "They want silence with receipts." Hale handed me a thumb drive labeled invoices. He said, "If I fall, this goes to a newsroom, not a courtroom." The bullhorn voice counted down from 30 like a hymn for cowards. I hated how steady it sounded. We dropped into the crawlspace as Boots took the porch. Hale said, "Stay low, follow my belt." The earth smelled like damp pennies. Ethan hissed, "Mirrors are live in 90 seconds. Rachel said, "Then every copy makes a witness." Above us, hinges complained, and a door split. Dust rained in disciplined lines. My elbows scraped cinder block, while the laptop's fan whined like a guilty conscience. Hale's flashlight never swept. It pulsed once and went dark, breadcrumbing us in signals. I'd hit the floorboards where our heads had been. Rachel whispered, "The bracelet belonged to Caleb Vance." Ethan said, "Who is that?" She said, "Recruiter, my sister's ex. He taught me fear looks like courage if filmed right." A beam of red light combed the seam we had just crossed. Hale said, "Storm hatch in 10 feet. The house above began speaking in kicked furniture. We burst into night behind the house and ran for the black trees. A drone's spotlight stitched the grass into a moving cage. Hale said, "Left of the ditch, then straight to the tower." The old municipal water tower rose like a rusted crown. Ethan panted, "I was on their payroll but not like that." I said, "Say it clean." He said, "I wrote their indexing scheme in grad school under a shell company." Rachel said, "So the numbers sing because you wrote the choir." Ethan nodded once, eyes ashamed and furious at the same time. The drone's light found us and then lost us to branches. Hale said, "You two climb. I'll cut the light if it kisses me." His coat looked heavier than law. I heard the drone drop altitude like a curious hornet searching names. On the catwalk, wind slapped our words sideways. Ethan opened the laptop and killed every safeguard he had ever loved. Rachel said, "Mirrors are seated. We go wide." I said, "Name parallax or imply it." Ethan said, "Name it." He pushed the upload, and the screen turned into a map of hungry circles. Hale's voice came thin on my radio earpiece. "You have 2 minutes before their jammer eats the sky." The video cued, the bracelet bright as a wound in the reflection. Rachel said, "Caleb, if you're watching, I want you to know I learned the trick you taught me." She stared into the camera like it owed her rent. "I learned to be louder than your silence." Metric spiked and held. A new file name appeared in the archive feed. Cal Vance confirmation. Ethan said, "They just answered." Engines swarmed the base of the tower like ants discovering sugar. Hale said, "Time." We killed the screen and slid for the ladder. A voice from below called, "Detective, your file uploads next." Hale exhaled, a sound that meant he had already paid this debt. He pressed his badge wallet into my palm. He said, "Find Linda Graves in Dayton, Old Post Road, blue duplex upstairs." Ethan said, "Come with us." Hale said, "I'm louder down here." He walked toward the vehicles with hands visible, posture unafraid. Rachel grabbed my sleeve. "Noah," she said, "move." We sprinted for the rail line that ran behind the trees. A freight screamed its iron hymn and slowed for a signal. We caught the ladder on a boxcar like sinners catching breath. As the tower shrank, Hale's silhouette stayed upright. The drone light finally stopped searching and simply stared. The boxcar stank of iron and wind, and dawn crawled up from the cornfields like a bruise finding light. Ethan Cole said, "If Hale's alive, he'll make noise." Rachel Porter said, "He won't die quiet." The wheels hammered a rhythm that felt like a countdown. I watched frost creep along the seam of the door, and counted the breaths between mile markers. Ethan said, "Old Post Road, blue duplex upstairs," repeating Hale's words like a word. Rachel said, "Linda Graves used to sign off on vendor payments." Ethan stared at the floor. He said, "The numeric strings were my indexing, but I never saw footage." I said, "Then someone used your map to bury bodies you can't see." Rachel said, "My sister learned to vanish in plain sight. Caleb taught her that." The name tasted like ash in the cold air. The sky turned pale as hospital tile, and the train slowed for a yard no one had fixed in years. I said, "We jump at the signal and keep our heads down." Ethan said, "And if Linda isn't really a door?" Rachel said, "Then she's a mirror." Dayton wore a wet gray morning like a coat it couldn't take off. The blue duplex on Old Post Road leaned a little, as if listening. A chain rattled behind the door before it opened an inch. A woman's eye appeared, careful and tired. She said, "If Marcus sent you, you waited too long." I showed Detective Hale's badge wallet with my shaking hand. Linda Graves unlatched the chain and ushered us inside without pleasantries. She said, "I signed routine authorizations for HVAC and pest control. The work never happened, the checks always cleared." Ethan said, "Shells?" Linda said, "Shells with flags pinned to them." Rachel's voice flattened. She said, "Did a man named Caleb Vance come here?" Linda's mouth thinned. She said, "He came for tea twice and left with silence." The duplex smelled like lemon oil and secrets. A clock clicked too loud for the room. Linda said, "Marcus told me you'd bring the storm with you." Linda's living room was a museum of paper. Banker boxes lined the wall like obedient soldiers. She said, "I kept copies because guilt can be a filing system." She opened a box and laid out invoices stamped paid with routing codes that hummed like the archives numbers. Ethan said, "These map to my schema, but the checksums altered." Linda slid a small key across the coffee table. She said, "Unit 17B, Riverbend Storage. The last thing Marcus asked me to protect." Rachel said, "What is it?" Linda said, "A ledger and a tape someone left in my mailbox with a single red thread." The room seemed to tilt. I said, "The text we got mentioned a date 2 days out." Linda nodded slowly. She said, "Rook Quarry, midnight, compliance review." Ethan closed his eyes like the word hurt. Rachel whispered, "Compliance means someone screams." Linda's voice dropped. She said, "Or someone doesn't, and the contract fails." Riverbend Storage sat beside a thrift store and a billboard that promised forgiveness by the hour. The rain quit without apologizing. Linda walked between units like each one remembered her. She said, "Marcus told me never to open it alone." The padlock on 17B looked new against the old roll-up door. Inside, rows of labeled binders shared space with a dented safe the size of a microwave. Ethan said, "Numbers on spines match accounts." Rachel said, "Open the safe." Linda handed me a combination, written on a church program. The door swung with a sigh and revealed a Minid V tape, a ledger bound in blue cloth, and a bracelet of paracord with a single red thread. Rachel didn't touch it. She said, "He leaves souvenirs for control." My phone buzzed once, then died as if the room ate the charge. Ethan said, "They're jamming near Rook Quarry already." We found an old Minid V camcorder in a thrift bin 2 doors down and fed the tape like a confession. Static cleared to a conference room with the decor of expense reports. A man sat at the head of the table, face clean, eyes wrong. Rachel said, "Caleb Vance." He wore the bracelet like a wedding ring. He said, "Performance is truth." He clicked a remote, and charts bloomed that looked like heartbeats. Ethan said, "He's auditing terror like a KPI?" Linda whispered, "Contracts renew on proof." Caleb leaned toward the lens. He said, "If you see this, we're already on one another's calendars." The timestamp matched our message, 2 days ahead. He named Rook Quarry in a tone used for weather. Rachel said, "We cut the calendar." I said, "Then we cut the recorder." Ethan folded the ledger into his jacket like a spine he planned to borrow. I went flash. The sky outside darkened early, as if the day lost its nerve. Midnight dripped over Rook Quarry like oil that never dries. The wind carried the smell of wet limestone and exhaust. Ethan Cole said, "We only get one clean push." Rachel Porter said, "We bait the calendar and break the clock." Linda Graves stayed by the road with a prepaid phone and a list of reporters. Detective Marcus Hale's badge felt hot in my pocket, as if it wanted back. We moved along the fence, counting cameras, counting breaths, counting exits. Ethan whispered, "Schemas inverted. New uploads redirect to public nodes." Rachel set a decoy laptop by the gate like a shiny lie left for magpies. I said, "If Caleb Vance shows, we speak to his investors, not to him." Floodlights stayed dark, which felt louder than sirens would. The quarry mouth waited, patient as a vault that already knew our names. Somewhere below, a generator coughed and then held its breath. My phone showed no bars, but the voicemail icon pulsed like a heartbeat. The control shed was concrete and resignation. I eased the door, and the room exhaled cold dust. Ethan said, "Local network only, but the mirrors will still drink." Rachel laid the blue ledger beside the keyboard like an oath. Linda slipped in behind us and locked the door. She said, "Reporters primed, subject line pre-written." I said, "We stream the minute vive, then route payroll to names that vote." Ethan said, "Checksum rewritten to implicate the signatories, not the ghosts." Rachel stared at the camera lens and did not blink. She said, "Caleb, we brought the class you tried to fail." The router lights fluttered like moths caught between choices. Outside, gravel whispered under tires that wanted to be quiet. The upload dial crept from timid to brave. Headlights painted a stripe across the far wall, and then died. The door opened on a draft before it opened on a man. Caleb Vance stepped in with the calm of a lecturer who grades on a curve. He wore the paracord bracelet with the single red thread. Caleb said, "Performance is truth." Ethan Cole said, "Then speak into the mirrors." Caleb smiled like a policy. He said, "Compliance reviews need volunteers." Rachel Porter said, "I volunteer you." She held up the Minute V tape, and the room forgot to breathe. I said, "We streamed your keynote and your ledger." Caleb's eyes cooled 1 degree. He said, "You mistake a shadow for a wall." Outside, a drone skimmed the roof, like a thought trying to land. The upload bar reached a line that meant no one could call it back. The quarry woke all at once. Floodlights detonated, sirens complained, and the drone stuttered in surprise. Detective Marcus Hale's voice came from the catwalk speaker, dry as gravel. He said, "You wanted a witness." Hale stepped into a cone of light with an old-fashioned loudhailer. Ethan Cole said, "He made it." Linda Graves closed her eyes and finally inhaled. Caleb Vance said, "Turn it off," and I turn off the trucks. Rachel Porter said, "Leave the engines running. The fuel is ours." She triggered the relay, and our stream spliced to public watchdog feeds. Paper stormed the catwalk as the blue ledger shed its photocopies into the wind. Hale said, "Smile for the invoice." Vehicles revved, and then hesitated, waiting for orders that did not come. Dawn found us in a highway diner with a coffee that tasted like decisions. The TV over the counter ran our stream with subtitles and apologies. "I now in conducted the courier." Ethan Cole said, "My name was on their payroll, but not my consent." Linda Graves said, "Consent arrives too late in offices like theirs." Detective Marcus Hale rubbed his shoulder and watched the door, patient as habit. Rachel Porter drafted a statement that didn't flinch. She said, "We testify, and we keep copies in places that hate locks." My phone filled with voicemails that started brave and ended careful. Caleb Vance's feed went silent, which was louder than the sirens had been. Outside, trucks rolled toward the quarry with more cameras than keys. Hale said, "You don't win against a ghost unit, you starve it in daylight." I signed my name on the statement and felt the pen get heavy. The archive remembers who pressed play,